The Book of Enoch gets most of the attention. The fallen angels, the watchers, the secret knowledge they brought down from heaven. But Enoch had a companion text, a second book that named the watchers, calendared the years from creation to Moses, and described what happened in the silent spaces between every verse of Genesis. The early church knew it. The community at Qumran read it constantly. Then in 1546, a council in northern Italy cut it from the Catholic canon, and the West largely forgot it ever existed. This is the Book of Jubilees, and what it contains may explain everything Enoch only hinted at. It was the spring of 1947, in a cave above the Dead Sea, near a ruin called Qumran. A Bedouin shepherd tossed a stone into a cleft in the limestone cliffs and heard pottery shatter. What he had broken were the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Over the next decade, across 11 caves, scholars would catalog close to 1,000 manuscripts, the oldest copies of biblical texts ever recovered. And buried in that hoard, copied and recopied more often than almost any other book the community owned, was the Book of Jubilees. According to Yale University Library's Dead Sea Scrolls archive, fragments of around 15 separate Jubilees manuscripts were eventually identified across 5 of the Qumran caves. To put that in perspective, only the Psalms, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and Genesis itself were copied more often. The people who wrote, hid, and preserved the scrolls treated Jubilees as scripture. Not commentary, not legend, but scripture. The book is a strange thing to hold in your hands, even now. It runs to 50 chapters and over 1,300 verses. It is framed as a private revelation given to Moses on Mount Sinai, dictated by an angel called the Angel of the Presence. The angel tells Moses the history of the world from creation onward, divided into units of 49 years. Those units are called Jubilees. That is where the title comes from. But the angel is not retelling Genesis. The angel is filling in everything Genesis left out. In Genesis, the days of creation are stated, and the week ends. In Jubilees, the angel explains which angels were created on which day, what their orders are, and why the Sabbath was woven into the structure of the cosmos before there was anyone to keep it. In Genesis, Adam and Eve leave the garden, and the text moves on. In Jubilees, you learn that they stayed at the gate of Eden for 7 years before being sent further out, and that Adam burned incense at the threshold every morning. In Genesis, Cain kills Abel. In Jubilees, Cain's house collapses on him generations later in a precise act of poetic justice, stone for stone, because he had used a stone. These are not small embroideries. They are an entire underworld of detail running beneath the surface of the canon. And then there are the watchers. In Genesis chapter 6, in 2 of the most cryptic verses in the Hebrew Bible, the sons of God descend. See that the daughters of men are beautiful. Take them as wives, and father a generation of giants. Genesis says nothing more about it. Enoch tells the story at length, but speaks of the watchers as a collective, with only a handful of names. Jubilees names them more fully, places them inside a chronology, and ties their descent to a specific generation in the line from Adam. The angel of the presence tells Moses that the watchers came down in the days of Jared, the father of Enoch, and that their original mission was to teach humanity righteousness. That mission curdled. They taught instead the secrets they had been forbidden to share, mixed their nature with the daughters of men, and produced offspring who consumed the earth. The flood, in the logic of Jubilees, is not punishment for general human wickedness. It is a surgical response to a specific contamination. That single reframing reshapes the entire opening of the Hebrew Bible. Jubilees also prescribes a calendar that contradicted every other Jewish tradition of the era. The calendar in Jubilees is solar, 364 days, 52 weeks exactly. Every festival falls on the same day of the week every year. No drift, no intercalation. According to the University of Notre Dame research project that has spent decades retranslating Jubilees from the surviving Ethiopic manuscripts, This calendar was almost certainly the calendar used by the Qumran community itself. It is what they called the calendar of angels. The rabbis of the Second Temple period used a lunar calendar with adjustments. The Qumran community considered that calendar a betrayal of the original cosmic order. Jubilees was their proof. A book that names the fallen angels, dates the flood, fills in the gaps of Genesis, and prescribes a calendar that disagrees with mainstream Jewish practice. You can see why the community at the Dead Sea kept 15 copies of it. You can also see why the institutions that came after them would find it uncomfortable. If you are finding this useful, there are more stories like this on the channel. For roughly 400 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, Jubilees floated in the background of early Christianity. The Epistle of Barnabas seems to quote it. Origen of Alexandria mentions it by name. The historian George Synkellis preserves long passages. Several of the early church fathers treat it as authoritative. In the Eastern Mediterranean, in Syriac and Greek, fragments circulated and were read aloud. The book was known, used, and respected. Then it began to disappear. The Greek text was lost. The Syriac fragments were scattered. By the time the medieval Latin Church codified its scriptures, Jubilees had drifted to the margins. And when the Council of Trent convened in northern Italy in 1546, that drift was sealed into law. According to the published canons and decrees of the Council of Trent, Session 4, held on the 8th of April 1546, the council issued a definitive list of which books belonged to the Old Testament. The list was deliberately closed. Jubilees was not on it. Neither was Enoch. Neither were the longer Greek editions that the Eastern churches had long included. With one decree, the Catholic Bible was fixed at the boundaries it still holds today. The reformers who broke from Rome went even further, trimming the canon down to the Hebrew Bible alone. Jubilees was excluded from every Protestant Bible by default. And so, for almost exactly 4 centuries, from the Council in Italy to the Shepherd's Stone in 1947, the Book of Jubilees survived in only one place. In the Ge'ez language in the highlands of Ethiopia, copied by hand in monastery scriptoria, read aloud in the liturgy, treated as scripture by a church most of the West had forgotten. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserved Jubilees, along with Enoch, inside its broader canon. According to the published Orthodox Tewahedo Biblical Canon, the Ethiopian Old Testament is the largest of any major Christian tradition. Where Catholic and Protestant Bibles drew their lines, the Ethiopian Church drew none. Jubilees stayed scripture there. It never left. That is why the Notre Dame translators have spent so much of their work on the Ethiopic manuscripts. The Dead Sea Scroll fragments give us the original Hebrew of perhaps a quarter of the book. The Latin and Syriac fragments give us scattered passages. But the only complete Jubilees, the only version that runs from chapter 1 to chapter 50 without break, exists in Ge'ez, a language most Western scholars cannot read, in a tradition most Western Christians have never studied. Had the Council in 1546 ruled differently, the entire history of Western religion might have run on a different track. Children would have grown up hearing the names of the watchers alongside the patriarchs. Easter would have moved to a different date, governed by a different calendar. The gap between Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 would not be a gap at all. It would be the place where Jubilees lived. Instead, the book sat in a cave for almost 2,000 years and in a mountain monastery for nearly as long. It is being read again now, in scholarly editions, in academic seminars, in the slow, patient work of researchers stitching the Hebrew fragments back together. The text is no longer lost. But the place it once held in the larger story is. The angel of the presence, in chapter 1, tells Moses that the words he is about to hear must be written down for the generations to come, so that they will not be forgotten. The angel was on that one point almost wrong. The names the watchers brought down. The calendar that ran on 52 perfect weeks. The 7 years Adam spent at the gate of Eden. The Jubilees counted from creation to the giving of the law. They are all still there in 50 chapters that almost did not survive, preserved by a Bedouin shepherd and an Ethiopian monk who never met. That is the Book of Jubilees. And what it contains may explain everything Enoch only hinted at.